DreamWorks. Laugh. They're a pretty famous animation studio producing some incredibly popular movies, but you'll likely know them better for their ho-hum critical track record. Some people have too many problems with the average DreamWorks film: generic stories, low-hanging humor, celebrities in place of characters. But you know what? Many times, they've pulled through and managed to work with all these threatening aspects, as can be seen in their most popular series by a long shot, Shrek. These movies have been everything: loved, hated, ignored, dissected, and unsurprisingly, memed to death.
What are you doing in my swamp? 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 Oh, hello there!
If you know anything about Shrek these days, you'd probably know he's typically enjoyed ironically, as this postmodern pop culture icon worshipped by teenagers in the mid-2010s who thought Doritos and air horns were the peak of comedy. It's the wacky green ogre man who might have sinister plans for you. That was one heck of a phase we all went through. But now that we're on the other end of it, I like to think most people consider Shrek to be a largely good film franchise with some amusing quirks. What did it do wrong? What did it do right? Exist for one thing. Shrek originally came from a picture book written by William Steig and published on October 17, 1990. Steig was a longtime cartoonist working for The New Yorker for over 30 years and finishing the book when he was 82. While some parents were repulsed by the gross-out humor, it did fairly well, but would be largely forgotten today if it weren't noticed by two of the biggest names in Hollywood, Steven Spielberg and Jeffrey Katzenberg. Spielberg bought the rights to the book in 1991 and considered adapting it into a 2D hand-drawn movie, which would have been an interesting sight seeing how invested he was in animation in the early 90s. And by 1995, it was looking like it would be in the hands of the newly formed DreamWorks Animation. Jeffrey Katzenberg had recently left the Walt Disney Company after playing a massive part in the Disney Renaissance, but personal issues with the company's president, Michael Eisner, convinced him to part ways with the company shortly after production on The Lion King. So with a titan in the film industry and a force behind the most successful Disney movies yet, no one knew what to do with this thing. Not much has been shared of the first few years of the film's development publicly. A few leaks here and there paint a clearer picture of the original version of Shrek, now CGI, but sticking closer to the book and starring SNL star Chris Farley as the lead. But after Farley passed away in 1997, he was swiftly replaced by Mike Myers, leading into the movie we know today. After 6 years in development, Shrek was finally released across the nation on May 18, 2001. Directed by Andrew Adamson and Vicky Jensen, and written by Ted Elliott, Terry Rossio, Joe Stillman, and Roger S.H. Shulman, it did everything DreamWorks wanted. It was their mission statement to be a competitor to Disney, and Shrek actively fought against the clean, wholesome values of the House of Mouse with an edgy, stinky, fractured fairy tale that still had a heart and sophisticated script. DreamWorks had made/co-produced 4 movies already, but the modern edge and attitude of Shrek had a massive knock-on effect on not just their catalogue for the foreseeable future, but the rest of the animation industry. Blue Sky tried to compete with them to mix results, Disney tried to catastrophic results, Pixar didn't and had something we like to call a golden age. It was a hard movie to replicate, but replicate DreamWorks had to, as they began to produce sequels every 3 years. Shrek 2 in 2004 was even more successful, Shrek the Third in 2007 turned a profit but failed to impress, and finally, Shrek Forever After in 2010 also turned a profit, but got a mixed reception, as did the many spin-offs and specials. Audiences' reactions to Shrek got very turbulent as time went on, as the innovations it brought became the standard, then a product of a cruder era as animated movies began to take themselves far more seriously heading into the 2010s. DreamWorks have been trying to make a 5th movie on and off for 12 years now, but I'm more than happy for them to let it rest. Or do a live-action remake to take the piss out of Disney's. Come on, that'd be brilliant, who's with me?
She waited in the Dragon's Keep, in the highest room of the tallest tower, for her true love and true love's first kiss. Yeah, like that's ever gonna happen. What a load.
This is Shrek, a gross, antisocial ogre who wallows in a swamp. In any other fairy tale, he'd be the villain, or at least an adversary. But this isn't any other fairy tale. In fact, the creatures who inhabit this world are being sold off by the would-be kingdom of Lord Farquaad, the vertically challenged ruler of the land of Duloc. When his swampland is infested by these creatures one night, he and his new noble steed Donkey go on a quest to clear the land, which involves saving the fair Princess Fiona, who's hiding a pretty big secret. They've taken a classic fantasy narrative and inverted it. The monster is who we're following, and the royalty is difficult to trust. Just by making the least likely part of the world to be a hero the main character, we've got a fresh new perspective on the world bedtime stories come from. A grimier, more snarky perspective, but one with some excellent characters. Shrek is a lot of things: violent, reclusive, gross, misanthropic, but deep down, very lonely. We never learn much about his parents or why he lives in the swamp all by himself, but it's clear that the stigmas and hatred for ogres by the common man haven't helped much in improving his situation. Shrek's journey in this movie is all about taking baby steps into gaining a new circle of friends, one that'll care for and accept him as a pal, not a threat. Donkey's a talking donkey that's been traded from owner to owner, constantly annoying them with his long-winded stories and small talk. Shrek is his new vessel after escaping the fairy tale auction, so you've got two outcasts, with one of them wanting to be left alone, and the other not wanting to stop talking. It's the ultimate buddy comedy team-up, with Donkey doing a lot of heavy lifting and getting Shrek to be more sociable and carry on his quest. Fiona is a princess from the kingdom of Far, Far Away. That's its name. While she tries to put on a kind, cheerful persona for Shrek and Donkey when they rescue her, she has a feisty side, experienced in strange and disturbing activities, and doesn't like to be out after sunset. Okay, we all know the reason for this by now, right? She's a were-ogre. If I spoiled it for you, you had 20 years to watch the movie. This was a pretty good twist, turning her from another 90s not like those other girls girl into a more curious and tragic figure. One who doesn't know there's someone who might still like her in this so-called cursed form. Lord Farquaad is a wonderful villain. It wouldn't be a Shrek movie without one of those. He too is a little different from the average Joe, not being very tall, but what he lacks in stature he makes up for in power. He's taken control of a land and turned it into an amusement park in his image. He's completely self-serving, only wanting to marry the princess so he can be king. Really, the others occasionally making fun of his height is the least he deserves for taking advantage of medieval fantasy conventions for the sake of power. I still love every line that comes out of him. This is one heck of a strong celebrity voice actor lineup. It never sounds gimmicky. Eddie Murphy, Cameron Diaz, and John Lithgow slip into these roles. And Mike Myers' last-minute decision to redo all Shrek's lines with a Scottish accent shows that they cared for these characters and wanted them to be as entertaining as they could. This is by far the smallest main cast of these movies, and the crop of side characters isn't nearly as big as you remember. Here are some of the most noteworthy faces, roughly going by the order their stories were first told. Dragon is the guard of Fiona's castle, who's gotten very lonely on the job. She falls in love with Donkey in a heartbeat, but I'm just saying. I know he's the size of an eraser shaving to you, but treat him with respect, girl. She does eventually. Robin Hood and his merry men are French vigilantes who mistake Fiona for a captive of Shrek's. They consequently get beaten to pulps, but not before some river dancing. The three blind mice are mice, and there are 3 of them, and they're visually impaired. The big bad wolf is a chill dude living the lifestyle he wants. Some of these guys are just a joke or two, but get more prevalent in later movies. The magic mirror belongs to Lord Farquaad and gets him to select the princess he wants to marry through a dating show. One of my favorite scenes in the movie. So this is what TV looks like in this world. The 3 bears only appear in this movie. The mother's separated from them, and I think there's a good reason their story ends there. The 3 little pigs are German. They aren't much yet, but they've got character at least. Gingy is your next Tumblr sexy man who's got quite a beating in this movie, getting tortured by Lord Farquaad. He gets better in the end though. He's pure and deserves happiness. You aren't escaping the year of Pinocchio that easily. Here's another puppet boy going by that name with a big nose and awkward voice. It's gonna get really raspy over time, so get excited. Some newcomers to the fairy tale world include the Scarred Man and Felonious, who sets part of the story into motion. If he hadn't convinced his lord to pick number 3, who knows what could have transpired. Along with a bunch of other fairies, dwarves, elves, and talking animals, the fairy tale creatures make the world feel more lived in, but are put out of focus once Shrek and Donkey go on their adventure. It's almost like they want you to get hyped for the dance party ending. And no night out is complete without the Shrek in the Swamp
karaoke dance party.
Please keep up
The most prominent theme everyone could see both then and now in the writing of Shrek is an anti-Disney sentiment. Katzenberg had a messy departure from the company, and it's obvious that a lot of his grievances with them were projected into the movie in various ways. For one thing, Lord Farquaad bears a likeness to Michael Eisner, and a lot of the references to stories Disney adapted are more cynical. Geppetto's selling his child, Snow White's called a dead broad. It's not exactly like having a partner that constantly brings up their ex in a negative way. As I've shown, they parodied a lot of fairy tales Disney might have done, but haven't monopolized pop culture's perception of. Sorry, Robin Hood fans. And I know you're probably tired of every family movie these days getting a PG rating, something Shrek arguably started an epidemic of, but it earns its rating. It can be pretty crass and vulgar, but the gross out is always in service to a character moment, world building, or a larger joke, so I can tolerate most of it. The reliance on miscellaneous pop culture references is hard to overlook, but combined to give the movie a constantly fresh and unique feel. Tons of licensed music from the 80s and 90s is used, and when Smash Mouth and The Matrix are your trendiest shoutouts, it's fair to call this the most 1999 movie to ever release in 2001. I stand that the Scottish accent was well worth the delay. Through all this turn of the millennium edge and snark, you can find a pretty sweet story in Shrek. They use their inverted fairy tale setup to spread the message, don't judge a book by its cover. Ogres are considered horrible beasts to the point Shrek has no friends and Fiona wants no one to see her in her ogre form. But come the wedding, and where in any Disney movie they would have had Fiona revert back to her human form permanently for the big true love moment, here she stays an ogre. She has no need to be ashamed of who she is, because she's got someone there who understands. You've got to put up with the most generic misunderstanding in the world before you get to that point, and yes, the script isn't perfect. There are some very predictable plot beats, and a plot hole opens up here or there, like how come Shrek's making fun of Farquaad's height if this was their first interaction? I guess Donkey told him beforehand, or else he wouldn't have compared his castle to a weenie. There are a few things they don't explain very well, but the overwhelmingly strong world building gets your imagination to do some of the work. Here's the part of the show reviews where I usually list off my favorite episodes, but I hope my favorite scenes can serve as a suitable alternative. Shrek scaring off the villagers. It's a famous roar, and it blowing out their torches is a wonderful touch to make it even bigger. Almost every Shrek and Donkey interaction, from the point they meet to their reconciliation towards the climax. Something was really coming together. I know the first movie gets some flack for not being as joke-heavy as the sequels, but I love the laid-back tone of scenes like the Big Onion debate of 2001 and... okay, the bridge scene isn't that laid-back, but it's got the best structured joke of the whole movie. Oh, the Farquaad mascot is a classic. That's Andrew Adamson voicing him. I've served him coffee, but I've never pestered him about his contribution to this timeless performance. I'll come to bat for some parts of the generic third act conflict. I like how Donkey reacts to Fiona's secret, and how he kinda settles down and gets more headstrong around Shrek after it. He's learning a tough part of being a friend, keeping your mouth shut. And while the Hallelujah montage slows things to a crawl, I've always loved this shot for some reason. I mean, if you've got a 3D camera, might as well do something pretty with it. And I really do love the credits music, Stay Home, and It Is You I Have Loved especially. The latter deserves to be DreamWorks' anthem in every way you can define the word deserve. And what a stimulating environment they were able to whip up. CGI movies were still a very new thing, and no standard of quality had been set yet. Shrek set that standard, and broke an Academy Award record in the process. There's tons of excellent photorealistic sets that are all colourful and feel lived in. Some of these shots still feel so expansive. It was also new to have this many humans in a computer animated movie, and while it doesn't look new anymore, it's remarkable the extent to which it's held up. The one shot that's always bothered me is how rough the animation of the wanted poster floating is. Could have done with another render pass. I'm surprised getting sent to work on Shrek was considered a punishment in DreamWorks' early days. That would not be the case any later. It would have been a privilege.
Enough, Reggie.
Shrek 2 began production as soon as the first movie was finished, and had much of the same staff. Andrew Adamson was in much more control, providing both the story and much of the directing duties, now shared with Kelly Asbury and Conrad Vernon. DreamWorks only released 2 movies between Shrek 1 and 2, hand-drawn movies that didn't set the world on fire. But when Shrek 2 released on May 19, 2004, it set a new bar for the studio that hasn't been topped. $928 million at the box office. That's like the global GDP in today's money. And while some critics weren't as blown away by the second installment, others considered it far superior, and fandom consensus these days seems to agree that it's the peak of the franchise. And having seen it again, I have to agree. I'll always have a lot of respect for the first movie and what it accomplished, and I'd instinctively choose to watch it again over the others, but there's no denying that the second is so much better in so many areas. Hopefully you can see the clearest improvement, the animation. It's so much more robust, with the human movement being of utmost importance, seeing how they dominate the story. I noticed they've made the eyes a little bigger and the skin more textured to make them seem a little more real and exaggerated at the same time. And jumping the gun a bit with the story, but there are so many bigger and grander locations. Some of them are only seen for a few seconds and only exist for world building, but places like the streets of Far Far Away and the fairy godmother's potion factory invite so much color and excitement. The world is a lot more fleshed out, and you're gonna learn some amazing things about it. After Shrek and Fiona's honeymoon, they go home only to get greeted by some royal mail. Fiona's parents have been informed of her marriage and want to meet the husband at their place in Far Far Away. But, you know, given how much society still fears ogres, I mean, Fiona was locked away for a reason, things don't go well at all. For one thing, the trip there is a cinematic masterpiece of a grueling carriage trip, and King Harold is very intolerant of his daughter's new sub-royal lifestyle and family. It runs the danger of being an incredibly generic marriage crisis, but they get through the worst of it pretty quickly with a fight where both Shrek and Fiona have some pretty good points. We then learn that King Harold has actually been bargaining with the fairy godmother, who's planned for her son Prince Charming to marry Fiona, and she's got a pretty firm hold over him. So it isn't just societal prejudice that's holding back Shrek's continued happily ever after, but also corrupted politics. It's all still fantasy driven enough to appeal to the same wide audience as the first movie, with the cast being far more robust. Shrek's much more of an everyman in this movie. Donkey and Fiona have tamed him quite a bit, but he's still proud of his lifestyle and interested in keeping Fiona. He's more headstrong, willing to take risks, and it's not for a self-serving cause. He's got a wife and man-child to hold on to. It's pretty neat that they're giving him this sort of adventure that requires less of a personal journey and more one of perseverance. How far is he willing to go to impress Fiona? Pretty far. I can't say the same for Donkey though. He's hilarious, don't be mistaken. He's just as funny here as in the first movie, but here he slipped into the role of Shrek's Disney sidekick, the sort of role they were kind of making fun of in the first movie. But I doubt this has ever been a turn-off for anyone as long as they still get their fix of equine Eddie Murphy antics. Him, Myers, and Diaz returning ate up somewhere between 20 to 43% of the movie's budget, believe it or not. But I felt they could have done more with Fiona. She and Shrek hardly interact after the first act. She's mostly just stuck in the castle while the new characters around her make the action go forward. Her role in the climax is when she's at her most important, so she's got build-up going for her. There are less Duloc adjacent fairy tale creatures than in the last film, but the core team they've settled on is well rounded. Gingy, Pinocchio, the Big Bad Wolf, 3 Blind Mice, 3 Little Pigs, and Magic Mirror. And Dragon's off producing these alarm bells. The scenes this pack share together are rather homely. You're getting a sense they've got chemistries but are still new to this whole adventure thing, especially in the climax. Gingy was clearly the breakout star of this little troupe, directly playing a big part in Shrek's return to Far Far Away. So the original cast wasn't sidelined or forgotten or anything, but they had to make room for some new kids on the block, and what new kids they turned out to be. Puss in Boots, played by Antonio Banderas, is a Spanish iteration of the famous Nomad, and I think it's fair to say it supplanted all other pop culture iterations in the public eye. He's the whole package. He's got a mysterious past, first appearing as an assassin, some great moments to shine as a Zorro send-up, and the biggest kitty cat eyes you ever did see. I have to give some extra praise for how well he's integrated into the lineup. It would have been fatal if he came off as a gimmicky addition, but no. He adds a third voice to the Shrek and Donkey squabbles that's sorely needed at times, and has great chemistry with them before long. Seeing his friendship with Donkey in particular unfold is really sweet. The King and Queen of Far Far Away are actually a middle-aged take on The Princess and the Frog. Come on, Queen Lillian, the lily pads on their bedroom walls, that's some good foreshadowing. King Harold, played by John Cleese, is part stubborn old father who won't accept his new son-in-law, but he has good reason to fear for his own life and the chance they stay married, so he's got multiple things to learn about his family and himself, what he should put first, making all kinds of decisions throughout the story that leave big impressions. His arc is excellently handled, but I think Queen Lillian's small role is a bit overlooked. She's his rock, his tether to the meaning of love, warts and all, and Julie Andrews' performance is very welcoming. Although I wonder why they got two British actors to play parents to an American princess. The movie's main villain is the fairy godmother, everyone's fairy godmother, played by Jennifer Saunders, a two-faced celebrity known for her loving maternal side, but she actually has a very closed-minded idea of what a happily ever after looks like. And not to keep kissing up to these millionaires, but Saunders brings so much to this character. From her first big song, you know something's up with her, some serious perfectionist issues bubbling under the surface that are fully endorsed by the far, far away lifestyle. She's also an overbearing mother, intolerant of the big bad wolf's preferences, and can sing generation-defining covers. Her son, Prince Charming, played by Rupert Everett, is more of a pawn in her scheme than a fully three-dimensional character in his own right. A snobbish mama's boy, he gets the ball rolling and has a few good scenes, but his mother's carrying more than just his arranged marriage. Still, what a cast. I didn't cover every new face, but I hope I've set a precedent that the story's conflicts are more personal in nature.
Well, I suppose that will be a fine place to raise the children.
The core message Shrek 2 delivers all through its story is that love is love, no matter what form it takes. Beyond Shrek and Fiona, there are quite a few unconventional pairings and interspecies relationships, and it's not for the sake of edge, more to underline how relationships aren't about looks or norms, they're about a close bond and trust. Shrek and Fiona have been married for a while, but their marriage is put on the line by a devious plot by the fairy godmother to carry out a conventional happy ending, which they start calling a happily ever after, which I've always found very whimsical and poetic, and a little corny. But just look at what happens to Shrek when he drinks a happily ever after potion to conform to Far Far Away's beauty standards. He ironically looks far less of a charmer. He doesn't look bad at all, I'm not a judge of that, but I was waiting for him to go back to his ogre form. Human Shrek just has way less character, and would have made the bond between him and Fiona less special if they kept it. Donkey, I could go either way, but you're still getting a pretty offbeat family there. By proxy, parenthood is another theme in this movie. Not that big, don't worry, we're not there yet, but King Harold's arc is a brilliant addition. Him breaking free of the hold that fairy godmother has on him is such a wonderful moment. He's there for his daughter now, not his skin, and it all provides a calmer outlet for the storytelling than the wild adventures Shrek, Donkey, and Puss go on. Sounds like I've been describing a very laid-back movie, introspection central. But when you're following Shrek, you're following a way more action-packed adventure than before. Far Far Away has a lot more going on than the Duloc adjacent areas. Even the forests are livelier and the castle's more atmospheric. You've got a modern-looking city as a central hub that puts Duloc to shame, and it all culminates in a wild night out and a magical party at the castle. By this point, they've dropped a lot of the anti-Disney humor and even some of the medieval vibes. But look, you don't want to make fun of mid-2000s Disney, that's just punching down. I will say the more modern spin can be jarring to some of you who got entranced by the classical tones of the first movie, how most of the modern references were from Donkey or in the soundtrack, compared to now where it feels like everyone's living in a parallel universe version of the 2000s. But given how we're in a sleeker, more bustling location, and Shrek's culture shock plays a factor in him feeling uncomfortable there, it makes a lot of sense to me. There's this attitude of, let's just have fun with it, see where we can go, what we can observe, how it can be funny. There are so many brilliant scenes in this movie, I could list them all, but here are the most valuable to me, the ones that entertain me the most. The carriage ride from the swamp to Far Far Away, relatable on so many levels, visually gorgeous, and it keeps you entertained while the characters are struggling to stay sane. It's comedy gold. The dinner scene, the initial meetup where they're all finishing each other's sentences is a banger, but the tension and build-up during this conversation tells you everything you need to know about how Shrek and Harold are getting along. Puss in Boots' introduction throws a massive wrench into the Shrek and Donkey dynamic viewers were familiar with, throwing them a violent cat, an angry cat, a raspy cat, and most importantly, a cute cat. Their journey through the fairy godmother's potion factory is also really fun. It's a rainbow in there, a very freaky rainbow that turns into a tidal wave of potion. From this point forward, the action keeps coming at you in surprising ways. Maybe too surprising, because let me just point out my least favorite scene in the movie: Shrek and Fiona just barely missing each other in the castle hallways. There's a timeline where they were smart enough to find each other and we got a shorter and worse movie, and I don't want to wish for that timeline. Back on track. The fairy tale creatures breaking the guys out of prison is pretty neat too, more banter, and we learn TMI about Pinocchio. Seriously, why does a puppet need underwear anyway? It surely doesn't. Whatever. Holding out for a hero. What do you want me to say about this? Jennifer Saunders' cover is dynamite, Mongo gave it his all, and everyone's playing their part. It's magical. The dance party ending is also good here, very clearly designed the same reason most dance party endings are, just to hype up the kids at the last minute. But I can't say no to Livin' La Vida Loca, it's physically impossible for me. And speaking of this stage, how about Far Far Away Idol? Yeah, this was back when American Idol was on top of the world and DVDs were a booming industry, so they whipped up this short for the home video release where Simon Cowell rocks up to Far Far Away and watches the characters perform some songs. Then it gave you the option to vote for your favorite, as long as you had the DVD. Speaking as a poor sap whose family had the VHS first, it was magical getting to finally cast my vote when we got the DVD a few years later. But that's the thing, years had passed since I'd seen this movie, and it was still exciting me and offering me new things. Among us youngsters, hype for Shrek 3 was real. Some of our friends even smuggled us a bootleg copy of it before it hit the shelves in New Zealand. So while we did see it at the old Sky City cinemas, this old bootleg copy we don't even own anymore is how I remember it looking the most. And that dark, low quality, 12 frames a second recording was a very fitting form of presentation. While most of the voice actors and animators were back to give it their all, it should be clear that the creative staff got an overhaul. While Andrew Adamson is credited as an executive producer and for providing the story, he was off directing the Disney Narnia movies by this point. Give those a rewatch, they've held up pretty well. In his place came a slew of new writers, and Chris Miller filling in the director's chair. Sure, he provided the voice of the Magic Mirror and Kowalski in the Madagascar movies, and would later direct the decent Puss in Boots spin-off. Putting him in charge of the third Shrek movie really toppled the House of Cards. Releasing on May 18, 2007, it didn't do quite as well at the box office, and critical reception was less forgiving. Now, 2 extra days between movies could have saved them a lot of trouble. It was just way too soon for a new installment. Most of DreamWorks' output was starting to resemble Shrek in different ways, so the appeal of its style and conventions was fading, not only within the studio, but the wider animated movie canon. So while this response could be seen as backlash and burnout to the trends Shrek started, it wouldn't have been this severe if it wasn't a huge step back from Shrek 2. With King Harold's failing health, Shrek's put in charge of more of the kingdom's activities and rituals. It's a right shame that he isn't good at any of it, so he's desperate to find another suitable heir to fill his place in case the king dies. The king then dies, but tells him Fiona's cousin, Arthur Pendragon, is another potential heir we never heard about before. So Shrek, Donkey, and Puss set out to find him, while Prince Charming and a whole gang of fairy tale villains take over Far Far Away as revenge for all the happily ever afters they never got. I think you can see some major problems with the story as soon as you hear about it. All the exciting possibilities of Shrek becoming a king, as promised on the posters and such, are redacted in a matter of minutes. Not that it makes much sense for Shrek and Fiona to take over in the king's absence, when the queen's still alive and well, and the whole secret cousin reveal could have been forgivable if the character was integrated into this world well, but oh golly, they couldn't even get the main cast right this time. Shrek has lost almost all his ogreish quirks, feeling very domesticated by the progression of the narrative. Just being a vanilla Joe is what the adventures have shaped him into, yes, but there had to have been a way to keep him interesting. Donkey and Puss in Boots have formed into a pretty reliable double act by this point, and admittedly, they're my favorite thing about the movie. Anything to take my mind off the story. Fiona is separated from Shrek for most of the movie too, but here they try to compensate by shoving in a girl power angle. She hangs out with the other Far Far Away princesses, one's narcoleptic, one's in the slave trade, one can't think, one only exists for a contrivance, and Doris is there too for some low blow trans jokes. Equally disappointing, Queen Lillian's only purpose in this whole movie is to headbutt some walls. I don't like this strain of the story at all. Instead of regaining more purpose, Fiona feels even more sidelined with this tacked-on girls' night out angle. King Harold just exists to die, but we've got new company in the form of Arthur Pendragon, voiced by Justin Timberlake, and their flimsy take on the legend of King Arthur. Attending Worcestershire Academy, he's very unpopular with the student body and faculty, probably because he's a whiny noodle who brags about being a big shot without doing anything. As much as the story wants to change your mind, he isn't shown to be capable of jack diddly squat. At least Merlin adds a little positivity to the new crew, but even though I think Eric Idle turns in a good performance, the Sword and the Stone Merlin from 1963 feels more like a Shrek version of the character than the actual Shrek character. He isn't bringing anything new or subversive, he's just on display if you like Eric Idle. The biggest problem with the Rogues Gallery here, and that's saying something, is that it reveals how little of a threat Prince Charming was. It didn't matter in Shrek 2 because he was a pawn in the fairy godmother's plan, but now that she's just a puddle of bubble soap, Charming has no hope of doing the heavy lifting. He bombed at a play, and his whole revenge plan is to slay Shrek at a bigger play. Whoop-de-doo. And the ragtag group of fairy tale villains he gathers aren't given the same sort of love and attention as the hero side of the fairy tale world. Captain Hook's fine, that's it. They're boring enough to get retconned to everyone's rejoicing.
You, my friend, are royally...
It should be very clear by now that the themes of the Shrek movies are linked to personal growth and going through the stages of life, and now Shrek's on the cusp of fatherhood. Yep, we've got the ugly ogre babies that I refuse to believe were added for the sake of marketability. It's not that I don't deep down, I just want to maintain a healthy frame of mind. In complete fairness, Shrek not wanting to be a father is given some justification. He says his parents were very violent and mean, and doesn't know if he could make a good parent himself. That's a fine wrinkle, but we still haven't seen a flake of dandruff from them, so I'm still left somewhat empty. That and the detour they decide to take with Arthur being there to prepare Shrek to raise a teenager. Whoa, back up. There's a lot to worry about as a parent before your child turns 13. Firstly, you have to learn how to deal with them losing their trust in you and parting ways in the middle of an invasion of a kingdom. God, this falling out is contrived. You have a mission and a kingdom to save, guys. What's the point of doing this revelation here? It sucks out whatever tension was still throbbing. Overall, it always feels like we're seeing Arthur through Shrek's eyes, as this whiny little kid who learns nothing about being a good leader. And what are Fiona's thoughts on being a mother? She seems to like the idea, but we never get her side of the story. We never get a scene where she and Shrek talk about it, at least one after Shrek knows. For such a big change to her life, shouldn't we be getting some conversations or introspection? Focus more on that than the girl power adventuring. On the villainous side of things, part of Prince Charming's plan is very interesting. How do all the fairy tale villains feel about getting bested? Being known for being bested and feared and pitied. The scene in The Poisoned Apple feels like it's setting up this question with multiple characters, but they don't do anything personal with them. A troll has a kid and that makes Shrek feel better about having kids? You can't see it, but I'm shrugging. And then they're all turned to the good side by Arthur's speech. Come on, I know they probably feel like fools for tagging along with Prince Charming, but how does Maleficent feel? How does Captain Hook feel? I don't want them to be background fodder, anything to take my mind off how underwhelming Prince Charming's plan is. If you want a direct comparison between the vibes Shrek 2 and 3 give off, look no further than the big climactic musical event. This obnoxious stage production can't form a dent in the fairy godmother's ballad. We've gone to a dull, surface-level place with very flimsy substance and wasted potential. If there's one part of the story I like, it's Donkey and Puss in Boots swapping bodies in the final act. It feels like a gimmick thrown in to keep them interesting, but there's always a chance in these sorts of episodes— I just said episodes, didn't I? There's always a chance in these sorts of plots that they'll learn something about each other, get a new perspective on the world, be happy with who they are in the end. It comes in small doses, but it's there. I don't feel like this was a waste of time. Eddie Murphy and Antonio Banderas are great enough voice actors to help this plot along, and it takes your mind off the story going on around it. It's excellent. But you know what the worst thing about Shrek the Third is? It looks terrible. And I don't mean the animation quality is low at all, it's very high. There's still a lot of detail and effort going into it, but for one thing, the movements have gotten even more realistic at the cost of being vibrant and expressive. And the lacking adventure puts a limit to what possibilities there are for standout sequences. When I think of Shrek 2, I think of the dinner scene, the factory, the party at the end. Here I think of a dream sequence dominated by dark greens and browns, a boring high school with medieval touches, sewers, a poorly constructed set, these very drab and or earthly environments that leave me feeling sleepy. And hardly any of these environments have memorable set pieces or potential for fun. Can we have at least seen Captain Hook's daffodils? That's such a tease. There was a deleted scene where Shrek, Arthur and co fight a dragon, and I doubt it would have been useful to the story, but it would have been stimulating. A change you might notice at this point in the franchise is that Shrek's skin is a little brighter and rougher. Good on them for tweaking him, I guess, but I vastly prefer the older, glossier model. This is some very insignificant minutia that you probably don't care about, so what are my favorite scenes? This segment's going to be pretty short because it's just a few jokes I don't want to over-explain. Bus and Donkey hitting Shrek to convince some guy he's a mascot is decent, and it's followed up by a marching band rendition of All Star at that. Shrek using modern lingo on Arthur is the best joke of the movie to me. It works very well. Some of the things Merlin says and the whole concept of the body swap and Seth Rogen likely dying, but most of the jokes in this movie fall flat. The timing's a bit off, everything feels sluggish and basic. Very few of the jokes have a strong setup or punchline, so what could be great bits don't have a good enough hook. Some of this comes down to slower animation and the new writer's room, but the weak story keeps them from being strapped to something meaningful. The movie ends with Shrek and Fiona moving back to the swamp, and King Arthur's booted out of the picture for future installments, of which there are many: Shrek the Halls, Scared Shrekless, the Shrek shorts on YouTube. By the late 2000s, there was an oversaturation of new Shrek media, an ogre load if you will, and it came way too late. Sure, there was tie-in material in the early years, but what made this new material less exciting was that Shrek was old news. The newest movie was lackluster, other animated movies had copied its style to mixed results, and DreamWorks movies were slowly starting to go to more serious places. We had to move on, but Shrek wasn't done just yet. One more movie was in the pipeline. Originally called Shrek Goes Forth, as time went on, it became clear it would be the franchise's final chapter. A Shrek Forever After.
And they live happily
Ever?
after.
Released on May 21st, 2010, the longest gap between movies yet, the sting of Shrek the Third was still felt, and despite the once again refreshed writing and directing team, with SpongeBob writer Walt Dawn in their back pocket as a good luck charm, critics and audiences were unsure about this movie. Mixed reviews all around, some thought it was a bounce back, others considered it the worst one yet. But as time has gone on, fans have slowly warmed up to it. There are even some who consider it the second best of the series, ahead of the first movie. I don't have the right words to describe those people, but yeah, I watched it in theaters as an 8-year-old, never got the DVD, and revisited it a couple years later. I liked it a lot more then, and I like it a lot more now. So here's what's written on the final chapter. Rumpelstiltskin is introduced to the world of Shrek as a con man who will offer you a cryptic deal with a hefty price. One day, Harold and Lillian, desperate to see Fiona freed from the tower, almost sign one of his contracts. But that one day happened to be the day Shrek rescued Fiona. As we know, Shrek goes on to live a happy life full of friends, but he soon finds himself in a rut, his free time and ogre instincts being taken away from him by the challenges of fatherhood. After blowing out at his children's birthday party, he says this to Fiona.
I used to be an ogre. Now I'm just a jolly green joke.
This line perfectly sums up Shrek in so many ways. As a 2022 viewer looking back, Shrek's remembered now for being a big part of meme culture, his image alone being enough to amuse people, in stark contrast to back in 2001, when he posed a threat to everything we knew about the biggest children's media empire. It also applies to how he's evolved in-universe, the initially antisocial ogre, now having been tamed and stuck in a safe routine, as well as the public's perception of the movies, how they were once revolutionary, but now seem to be made to make little kids giggle and clap. While Shrek agreeing that he wants to go back to how things were before he rescued Fiona is an extremely polarizing moment, it's like he's gained some self-awareness to what's happened to him over the past decade. It's time to look back and see how Shrek has changed the world, and what better way to do that than by removing him from it. He finds Rumpelstiltskin in the woods and falls for one of his deals to exchange one relaxing, responsibility-free day for one from when he was just a baby. He just leaves out the detail that it's the day he was born, so Shrek's into a world in which he never existed, but it's not a wonderful life. Far Far Away has degraded substantially without Shrek and Fiona. Fiona was never even saved, and Harold and Lillian, in their haste to make the problem disappear, disappeared themselves. Donkey's owners have only gotten more sadistic with time. Fiona's the leader of a resistance group of ogres, Puss has let himself go, and who's in charge of this anarchy? Rumpelstiltskin, seizing the throne in the royalty's absence. So it's plain to see what the message of the movie is about. It's basically the same as for its direct influence, It's a Wonderful Life. Shrek means a lot to the world. He's saved so many people over the years that a world without him would be in shambles. I guess that's why our timeline sucks so bad, we don't have Shrek to save us from everything. But I think we can skip the returning character rundown for this movie, simply due to how character-driven the themes are this time, and how each of the others' roles ties into Shrek's journey more than ever. How about those new ones? Rumpelstiltskin, admittedly, took a long time to grow on me, and it's still taking a while. The idea of a nobody character taking control of the story is sound, and they go a long way of showing how much of a threat he is as king. But I don't know if I'll ever get over how creepily big his eyes are or how squeaky his voice is. The latter I do get the point of, its comedic juxtaposition, but we're 10 steps forward and 1 step back. Shrek also has to deal with a tribe of ogres, who Fiona's taken command of. The 3 main ones that they want you to remember are the tough and gruff John Hamm one, the tough and gruff Jane Lynch one, and Cookie, the funny one played by Craig Robinson with a name that's easy to remember. Quipping aside, it makes complete sense that the ogres we see in this reality are bigger and stronger than we ever expected. Shrek and Fiona are pretty meek and domesticated compared to their brethren, making them feel more human and the others like a stronger force. Rumpelstiltskin has a few tricksters up his sleeve, including an army of wicked witches akin to the real protagonist of The Wizard of Oz. Quoting it verbatim should make that clear, but they're a good, unique type of henchman, something that had been getting harder to come up with each passing movie. But I think the real new breakout star is the Pied Piper. Instead of the innocent background gag he appeared to be back in the first movie, this interpretation is a cunning servant to the king, playing a magic flute that can make his victims boogie uncontrollably, with jiggy results. He only speaks through his music, performed by Jeremy Steig, who, you're gonna have to sit down for this one, is the son of the late William Steig, the creator of Shrek discussed at the start of this review. William only lived to see the first movie, but loved it all the same, and it's heartwarming to know that his family eventually got involved in the film series in a small but impactful way. Then there's the Do the Raw kid, the last big meme to come out of the movies. He's a feisty little fella, isn't he? But trust me, he was the talk of the town at school for a pretty long time after this movie came out. During the period where no one really cared about Shrek Forever After, I think at least it was the one with the Do the Raw kid, but it offers so much more than I realized.
You've got to trust me.
Why should I trust you?
Because... Winter, spring, summer, or fall.
The main thing Shrek's running away from at the start of this adventure is responsibility. He wants things to go back to the way they were when he was younger and feistier. I think that's a struggle people are going to relate to more as they get older, so there's a likely reason the movie's been a sleeper hit. It takes time to think like this, and Shrek has no trouble rushing back to the good old days, unwillingly costing him the present. They do a really good job of making you feel nostalgic for the first movie. There are tons of pleasing callbacks that make it seem like things are coming full circle. There's still some of that magic kicking in this timeline, no matter how corrupted it's gotten. Some of the little things they bring back are a no-brainer. It's only been 2 movies since we've seen some of these, like Fiona's human form or the magic mirror, but it feels like 10 eternities, trust me. But if there's one very important thing Shrek had at the start of the adventure that he didn't have now, it's a family. And I don't exactly mean a loving wife and babies you can put in a DS pet simulator, yes this is real. Donkey, Puss, Queen Lillian, the fairy tale creatures. They all meant the world to him, he took them for granted, and now they're all in mortal danger or in need of a diet. I'm stretching the meaning of family pretty wide, but a lot of the time, Shrek's friend circle feels like his family. They've all been supportive of him since his wedding to Fiona and continue to provide close help. I can't think of the Shrek movies without this magical clique, so to see him win them back all over again is proof of how much he needs them. But despite how powerful this script is, with some insanely cheesy lines working out in the end, they failed the final spot check. A plot hole or contrivance here and there slipped through the cracks, like the whole reason Shrek can't give up is because every Rumpelstiltskin deal has a 24-hour escape clause, but it doesn't seem like everyone would be so lucky as to pop their loophole. What would Harold and Lillian do? Have to spend 24 hours in the non-existent realm before they go to the super non-existent realm? And it's a pretty good thing Fiona never appeared in her human form to the other ogres as far as we're aware. I don't know if they'd mind or not, but you know what I don't mind? A few little details that don't matter to the overall story and message. This is a movie that puts emotion over reasoning in how it writes and how its characters behave, and I have to say that's a good call. This isn't a movie that should be bogged down by details. A few rules, sure, if only to make the events tighter. And in terms of animation, what a bounce back. I think the humans are starting to look a little uncanny, it's the eyes, but look at how far they've come in every other area. The detail is exquisite, the exaggeration is back, and the emphasis on action-packed set pieces was long overdue. It had to be big and bold from start to finish, because it was produced in cinematic widescreen and screened in various 3D formats, back when 3D was becoming an impractically big deal. With that knowledge, there are scenes you can tell were made to feed into this gimmick, with a rotating camera and particles of all kinds flying at you, but now that no one's seen the movie in 3D in years, it's dramatic enough to never cross your mind. If I had to list some of my favorite moments from the final chapter, the Do the Raw Kid is a silly little highlight for me. Everything else about that party scene is designed to drive you insane, except him. He's your window to escapism. Shrek's day off is also another fun breather scene. You feel good for him that things have gone back to basics, and see what village life is usually like until he swoops in to pull off his classic ogre pranks. I guess squeezing the jelly from their eyes would dampen the mood a bit. The use of Top of the World by the Carpenters certainly helps make it breezy, and in general, the licensed music this go around is a lot more uplifting and jovial. As is the case with the Pied Piper's attack, I guess if any song were to be Ogre Kryptonite, it would be Shake Your Groove Thing. I can say the same thing about Donkey and Dragon meeting again, set to Hello by Lionel Richie. It's over quickly though. And finally, True Love's Kiss is extremely corny, but worth all the build up. And Shrek getting to share a new talent with his family when he gets back to his world is the clearest indicator that he's learned something from all this. As for my least favorite scenes this time, there isn't much to cover, just some of the squabbling between Shrek and Fiona at the start of Act 3 being a bit tedious. That's just the risk you run of having to repeat some hurdles in your fourth movie. This also has probably the most blatant dance party ending of the series, with all the characters from Rumpelstiltskin's dimension coming over to the swamp. But as one final party, with I'm a Believer now performed by Weezer, there was no harm in this dimensional collision. And this movie has a bloomin' amazing credit sequence, a beautiful montage of events from all the prior Shrek movies, set to For Once in My Life by Stevie Wonder. What better way to wrap up a movie all about seeing the value in your friendships and life journey? But what got me was this little message near the end of the credits scroll. Heartfelt thanks to all the talented artists who worked on Shrek for the last decade. And for those of you who worked on it in the 90s, sorry about the therapy bills. But what a journey this series went through. No one wanted to work on it at first, but it gradually turned into one of the most beloved animated film series of all time, and easily the most memed, but I don't think that's out of any sort of disrespect. It's easy to get that impression with a series that seemed to be around forever and had begun to outstay its welcome by the end. But people memed on All-Star because it was a good song. People memed on Shrek's supposed love of onions because it's funny. And the more they shared these abstract, out-of-context references, the more we started to take the movies more seriously in contrast. It wasn't amazing all the way through. I think I've made it pretty clear that Shrek the Third is leagues below the rest. But 3 out of 4 ain't bad. Especially if they're 3 great family movies that, while full of pop culture references, have characters that stand the test of time. This is the start of my 5th year reviewing cartoons on YouTube, and I can't believe I've held off film reviews. If you're interested, there are more series with 3 or more entries I'm hoping to get to at some point. But how is this for a start? A decade-defining series, with enough laughs and layers to always find joy in. Keep the book on the shelf, it'll come in handy.
We'll be right back in just a moment.
Now, where were we?
Oh, I think I remember.